Welcome everybody to today's seminar on increasing the role and impact of AI. I was going to wait a couple of minutes before we get going just to allow people to come in. We've got a number of participants joining us, so we'll just wait a minute, but we will get going shortly. So while people are joining, I'd like to begin by acknowledging the many traditional owners of the land upon which we are meeting today. For me, it's the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation. Welcome to this webinar on increasing the role and impact of AI. It's the first seminar we've run on the topic, and the large number of registrations we've had today is testimony to the interest in today's conversation, which we hope to unpack some of the emerging themes as well as applications of AI in the startup sector. Victoria's startup sector is growing, and indeed Victoria's AI startup sector is growing. Our 2020 ecosystem mapping report released in September 2020 showed that just over 10% of startups are using AI in the development of their company. But the potential is huge, and we'd like to see the use of AI increase. It's why in June this year, we proudly partnered with Artesian Capital and others to provide 1.5 million to Boab AI, Australia's first scale-up accelerator and investment program for startups empowered by artificial intelligence that will help them scale their businesses globally. And we're delighted to have Andrew joining us here today, who's the managing director of Boab and been the brains behind the organization since inception. We've assembled a really exciting lineup to help us explore the topic and share their thoughts on the impact of AI and what we should be doing to help more startups embrace technology. Before I get started, I'd like to say a couple of things on housewarming. We have a Q&A channel, and can I please ask that you send through your questions on this channel, and I'll do my best to moderate them into the discussion, which I'm sure will be a very thoughtful and thought-provoking conversation. So please use the Q&A channel for your questions. The chat channel is the best way to communicate with fellow attendees, and please use this to communicate with each other and join in the conversation. So without further ado, I'd like to I'm going to introduce our panelists one by one and ask them to tell them a little bit about themselves and how they became involved in AI. So first up, I'm going to throw to Andrew Lai, Managing Director of Boab AI. I suspect many of you on the call know Andrew. He's played a leadership role in Victoria's startup ecosystem, including at SproutX as well as Deakin University. Andrew, could you tell us a little bit about your background and why you chose to take on a leadership role in AI? Because you had many sectors at your fingertips, given the roles you've had in the ecosystem.
Sure, and yeah, thanks for the generous introduction, Kate, and also thanks to LaunchVic. I did study software engineering at university. I never ended up becoming a full-time professional programmer, and one of the areas that I had studied 20 years ago was, I think they called it agents at the time, which was related to AI, but the definition of AI has changed. And I've always just been fascinated, I think, by, the power of artificial intelligence and the ability to automate things. And look, I mean, for a while now, I've always felt that the Australian economy is probably a little bit too heavily aligned towards mining and, digging up coal. And I've always felt that, AI is the opportunity for us to increase productivity. So it's something that I've always been attracted to, and it just so happened that there's a bit of a gap, I suppose, in terms of C to sort of Series A funding, and that's what we managed to put together that deal with yourself and Artesian Ventures, and get that going. So look, it's definitely something that I've always liked, I've studied, and have really hoped to bring something like this about.
Fantastic, thank you. So secondly, I'd like to introduce Barb Hyman, the CEO of Predictive Hire. The first of two Barbaras here today. Barb started her career as a solicitor over 25 years ago and has since held leadership roles in a very broad range of industries. Barb, could you tell us a little bit about your journey and in particular about Predictive Hire?
Yeah, no, thanks so much. So I'm probably a pretty unusual leader of a AI company, given I'm neither an engineer nor a data scientist. So Predictive Hire works in the recruitment space, and what we've built is really experiential and quite unique AI that uses chat to understand whether someone's a great fit for the role. And I think the responsibility when you work in AI, but particularly in the HR field, is how do you create an experience that people can trust, both the candidate and the user? And so I guess what I bring to it is, having worked in senior HR roles, I really understand the people side and how to connect and what kind of assessments, what kind of interactions are really going to work best for people. So how did I land here? Through most of my jobs, I've been extremely unplanned and 100% opportunistic, kind of in an accident. So I think to all those young kids, and I say this to my own, don't worry too much and don't think too much about what you're going to do. Just go for it if it feels really great in terms of learning. And so that's kind of how I landed in this role.
Thank you. Thanks very much for that. So next up is Dean Freestone, co-founder and CEO of Seer, Australia's largest provider of epilepsy diagnostic services. From medical device development to machine learning algorithms, Dean has pushed the frontiers of medtech over the last decade and received numerous accolades for your hard work. Dean, can you tell us a little bit about your journey and how you ended up founding Seer?
Yeah, thanks very much, Kate. And thanks to LaunchVic for hosting the event. And thanks to everybody for tuning in. So my background is, largely an academic background. I did lots of research in the area of reverse engineering the brain. So I was working at the boundaries of sort of machine learning engineering and neuroscience and neurology. And I got heavily involved in medical implantable device trials, dealing with huge amounts of data pouring in from all over the place. And one of the things we learned from this is that when you're dealing with these huge quantities of data, you really need to have great systems to be able to interpret them. So I pushed on more down the AI path, and I went off and worked in New York City in a machine learning lab. And at that point, I really got the entrepreneurial vibe going quite strongly. And I was really motivated to try and pull together all, my history in machine learning and neurology and understanding these medical devices to start Seer. Seer's been going now for about 4 years, and we're Australia's largest epilepsy diagnostic service. And we've got about 23 clinics across Australia and going strong.
Absolutely, and it's fantastic to watch what's happening at Seer. It's a great company. Finally, last but by no means least, it's my great pleasure to introduce Barb Sharp, co-founder and CEO of Pax Republic, a conversational data analytics company built for insightful discussion, not just answering questions. Barbara, welcome, and please can I ask you to tell us a little bit about yourself and how you founded Pax Republic?
Let me start again.
Thank you.
Thank you, Kate. Hello, everyone. So like all AI problems, or actually entrepreneurial problems, you start with a problem that you think is worth solving, and there's a big enough problem there that you can solve it. So where I come from is in the clash of, if you like, different points of view in the community against corporate ideals. So my background is in media and politics, but also crisis and reputation management. And the work that we did was in designing and running large-scale, multi-stakeholder negotiation processes, which is a convoluted way of saying getting a whole lot of people in the room who disagree about the same thing, getting them talking in a way that they will talk, and then learning from all of that conversation, applying it to a way forward. So when we decided, let's put ourselves out of business and get these conversations happening and include people early in the problem, was about the time that AI was really being democratized. So what it meant is that we were able to pull in a whole lot of expanding and some of them old, but really well-developed AI solutions to build our solution, which is essentially build a room where people can come in and talk, build the settings where they feel safe enough to talk, and then build the capacity to, because you've scaled it up, find the signal amidst the noise of all of that conversation. So it means we have built many different techniques in AI, particularly machine learning and natural language processing, and it's evolved as the business has grown. So it's been a fascinating journey already.
Thank you. And I always think it's so interesting to find out how founders came to their journey. I think the myth that you need to be technical to be a founder is being myth busted. I think 4 years ago that was very different, but I'm not sure we've cracked that for AI. I think there is a perception that you need to be an engineer, and we've certainly got some very technical people here today, but you don't have to have an engineering background. And I think that's a really big lesson.
Well, you do though have to have a few around you.
You do have to have, correct. And we'll come to that because I think the talent question is a very interesting one. But before we jump into, we'll jump into questions shortly, but I want to remind our audience, please don't forget to use the Q&A channel, and I'll do my best to integrate your questions into our discussions. But to begin with, I'm going to ask a question about the role of AI in the economy. And we find ourselves in a very interesting time in history. End of 2020, global pandemic, the world's been turned on its head. Here we are doing webinars by Zoom that is just so commonplace now. What do you think the role is, and how would you pitch the role of AI to the Prime Minister, for example? What would you say to our Prime Minister if you had an opportunity to convince him that AI is part of our future? So I'm going to throw that to Andrew in the first instance.
Thanks, Kate. And I probably jumped the gun a little bit in the introduction and talked about it. But yeah, look, I'm a data-driven sort of person, and I think the statistics sort of speak for itself. And I have over the years had a look at some of the productivity growth rates. And unfortunately for Australia, and it's a theme sort of around the world, but Australia is also guilty of it. Productivity growth is a lot less than what it used to be, and in some cases, it's going backwards. And in certain sectors, and I did, of course, do SproutX and raise a VC fund there, but essentially, that's one of the strong areas where there's been a lot of negative productivity growth. And I think for our economy, sort of coming out of COVID, the electricity price, solar electricity is apparently the cheapest electricity in history now. And so coal's our #2 export. And so not only are we hit with COVID, we're also hit by the fact that perhaps coal won't be our main export, a major export anymore, and other minerals. So we really need something else to sort of kickstart the economy, and AI, I think, is definitely a lever for that. It's certainly something that can be used from the agtech front. Robotics is finally at and you'd be, with your electrical engineering experience, you'd be more than aware that the gains in hardware and software are just unimaginable at the moment. And there's a lot of robots out there that can actually replace a lot of manual workers who can then transition to sort of higher value tasks as well. So yeah, I think, as we sort of discussed prior to this, AI is a horizontal and not just a vertical. It's a technology that can be used in any industry, and the productivity gains are within reach.
Fantastic, thank you. And Barb, you spoke a little bit about your background in hiring and talent. We've just touched on talent briefly, but why would an organization choose to use AI in decision making? After all, what's the argument that we know what to do? We're humans. Why can machines do it better? Isn't this a dangerous new world that we're going into?
Look, I think we all have to acknowledge that AI can be problematic. I think that's the necessary starting point for anyone that's using AI, but then it also offers tremendous opportunities. How do we take advantage of that? So, I think for me as a non-technical person, when I started to realize the power of this in recruitment came when someone shared a story with me, and they said that processing power in the last decade has accelerated to such an extent that is mostly invisible to us. It would be as if your iPhone battery would last 800 years. If iPhone battery advancements had moved at the same pace, that's how long it would last. And we all know how long our iPhone lasts. So when you take that kind of incredible speed, it starts to make you realize, wow, what can we do with that? And what we've invented is really, not so much we've invented, but the problem we're solving is if you think about businesses like Bunnings or Woolworths, they get 1 million applicants a year, 10, 20,000 a day. And they care a lot about those people because you know what, they all shop there. And they're going to reject in 6 figures, maybe even in 7 figures, and they are all people that they want to keep loyal to the brand. How do you make sure that you give everyone a fair go? How do you interview everyone? How do you help them on their journey to find their ideal job, even if you can't give them a job? And how do you make sure that what you're hiring is really representative of the community you sell to? You know, it's truly diverse. You're not going to do that with people, you know, for a number of reasons. Firstly, you're going to have to hire a team of about 120 people at a cost of 12 million a year to do that. So that's not practical. For a lot of these roles, you can't do it overnight, you know, and for anyone who's been in recruitment or applied for a job, we all know what it's like to be ghosted. So if you compare that, you know, would you rather have the experience of paying a huge amount of money, taking weeks or months to get back to people, the risk of introducing bias, or let a machine do it overnight and ensuring everyone gets a great experience? I think it becomes a really rational decision. So, you know, for us, what we're doing is really solving for that volume recruitment, identifying the best talent in a way that is genuinely inclusive because of the way our tech works. And frankly, when you think about hiring and promotion, you know, why do we have more people named Peter, John, and James as CEOs and board members in Australia? It's not because they're more talented, it's because of our own biases. So, you know, what I say to parents is, what we don't want is that your daughters miss out on those opportunities because we as humans find it really hard to check our biases. So I think, you know, I'm challenging the myth that AI equals bias. Actually, what we think is AI interrupts bias.
Fascinating and very insightful. I'm going to throw to Barbara now to say, what would your pitch to Scott Morrison be?
Well, it was interesting because I think it was just last week or a couple of weeks ago, he said that Australia is not going to be another Silicon Valley, which is well, maybe disappointing, but why would we want another Silicon Valley? Aside from Silicon Valley feeling like the end of the Roman Empire at the moment anyway, it's not an either or concept. I think the figure that really bumps up for me, and this alludes to something that Andrew said, is that I read a report that indicated that by 2027, which is 6 years away, the investment in AI will be $737 billion. So that's $1 trillion in Australian dollars. This is inexorable. It's going. Australia needs to be in there, not so much because they're going to compete with the rest of the world. It's not about competition. It's actually that AI cuts across prop tech, fintech, reg tech, every tech. As you say, it's horizontal. Scott Morrison invest in the ecosystem to support AI for Australian technologies so that we can compete, but also so that we can be part of that massive, the golden age of AI. It's going to need support and an ecosystem around us for the Australian economy so that we don't rely on the diminishing coal exports, that we can have new industries that are Australian grown. It's not about competition. It's actually about supporting business here and the economy here and people here, because, you know, we've got hiring that actually levels the playing field for women and people from other cultures. We've got epilepsy. You know, there are so many good things that AI can do. Let's do it for ourselves rather than the rest of the world.
Yeah, well said. And, you know, I think there's definitely something about talent retention, and I do want to come on to that, but I'm going to ask Dean to comment a little bit on healthcare. And I mean, AI is, healthcare is a massive opportunity, and the technification of the healthcare industry is only just begun. Where do you think we're going, and what's the future going to bring for us?
Yeah, thanks, Kate. So certainly it's an exciting area. You know, we're in the digital health space, and that's one of the great strengths of Australia. Actually, we've got fantastic digital health companies, and it's just an absolutely burgeoning industry right now. In the US, I think year to date, they've spent close to there's been about $10 billion invested in the industry. And it's a $3 trillion industry, which is absolutely staggering. So if you look at like a 5, 10, 20-year horizon, across the next 5 years, I guess we're going to see things that we currently do in the healthcare system just done more efficiently, more scalably, and more accessible. So we're just going to improve the efficiency of the healthcare system as it stands. In 10 years, I think we'll start to see some new things happening. And I guess the opportunity for AI is a more personalized healthcare system. But I really think that in that time horizon, it's still going to be in the hands of the healthcare professionals. And that's really important, because the edge cases and the life and death decisions that people need to make, we really need robust systems. But when we're looking out to 20 years, is where I really get excited about the true potential of the AI and machine learning. I think, and this is certainly something I believe, is we can work towards a more democratized healthcare system, more consumer focused, where people get to take more control of their health. And that's what we're trying to build at Seer.
Fantastic. And yeah, I completely agree. I think, you know, we've been through you know, in the 80s around Silicon Valley, the chips and everything that enabled, and then, you know, the software apps. And we're really just starting at the cusp of what's going to be a phenomenal wave of innovation. And it's a very exciting time. I want to come back to that question on talent. And I think, Andrew, you made the comment about robots replacing manual workers. Is this something that you think is something that we need to do more to counter this, in order to build confidence in the broader public about the use of AI? Andrew, I'll throw back to you.
Yeah, sure. And look, I mean, in terms of the feedback that I've received when we sort of did a lot of time with farmers and talking to them about how technology could sort of help them with their needs. And this is just, you know, one use case out of, I suppose, many different industries. Many of them sort of actually talked about how they would like to, you know, be working on tasks that really utilize their tremendous knowledge and their tremendous skill, but oftentimes they were sort of needing to do some very manual work that they, you know, didn't necessarily feel was to the greatest benefit of their business. So I think, you know, there's this idea that the robots are just going to replace all workers and no one's going to have jobs. And I think, you know, that's not necessarily the case. I certainly feel that there's a lot of talent out there and people have got a lot of skills, and it, you know, sometimes they just don't want to be, they just don't want to have that time sort of taken up doing some of the manual tasks that they may not sort of really like to do themselves either. So, you know, it's not a mutually exclusive sort of scenario. I think there's definitely room for AI to work together and, you know, actually help Australia to grow its economic footprint, as opposed to it being a race to the bottom, if you know what I mean.
Mm. And so on the other end of talent, you know, Barbara, you mentioned about the importance of being a non-technical founder and surrounding yourself by bright people that do understand the technology. How well do you think we're faring as a nation in having that deep expertise? And how easy have you found it to find the right talent as a non-technical founder? So I'll throw that to Barbara first, and then I'll throw the same question to Barb.
We have globally competitive universities here. You know, in Australia, our universities are churning out really excellent engineers, and particularly for, machine learning. It's excellent, and that's a strategic advantage that I really would like us to take. It's also that we've got this really good talent, and we actually take the best and brightest graduates out of the universities because they want to come and work in things like NLP, in particular for our data science. But this is an advantage. It's, if you go over to the US, for example, and Silicon Valley, you get lots of talent, but you can't afford it. The salaries are exorbitant. So there's a real advantage just in that talent, the talent we've got there, and ensuring that we give these really very, very bright people, you know, companies to go and work and expand their talents. That's part of the ecosystem of support that I think we have.
And Barb, what's your views?
Just one thing I want to say to what Andrew was saying in the context of, because we face this, you know, this fear when you're talking to the head of talent that you're going to take all the jobs of the recruiters and who wants to reduce the size of their team, is, you know, we think, particularly in our application, that AI is really a co-pilot. You know, it empowers, it helps, it builds the confidence of the person to make a better decision rather than something that displaces the human side. So just wanted to share that. So yeah, look, you know, we wouldn't be where we are without our amazing head of data science, Booty. And he's an immigrant. Most of us are immigrants, but he came from within the universities within Australia, as do all of our team. And I guess we're lucky because, you know, when you're building a a mission-driven business, and you're doing something that's on the leading edge of innovation, which our team are doing, it's easier to attract great talent. And when you're also doing it formula that people feel is so much better in terms of a human experience than the traditional experience that helps too. What I've observed, actually, having come from legal background and then worked in management consulting, is, these engineers and these data scientists just want to learn. Their kind of appetite and craving is all about, I want to work with the recent tools. I want to create something. I want to keep learning. It actually blows my mind how important that is. And so, all of us kind of Aussies, Caucasians, and I'm an immigrant too, by the way, who are all kind of missing the office. Like, for them, the office doesn't mean anything. Going back to the office, like, I think we confuse office with culture. For them, the work is what drives them and inspires them. And they could be working in a cupboard, which some of them literally do when we're having meetings and they've got partners at home on Zoom. And it's been a really interesting awakening around different cultures and different cohorts and what matters to them. So I think if you're building something that is really potentially changing the universe and changing the game, it's a lot easier to attract that amazing talent.
Mm. So we've got a lot of questions coming through, and I'm going to turn to those questions now, so please keep them coming. Dean, here's one that I reckon is for you. How significant is the challenge ahead to align regulation and legislation to respond to the rapid growth in AI? Great question by Melanie.
Yeah, great question, Mel. Look, it's challenging in such a heavily regulated industry like healthcare. At Seer, we've had to go through the regulatory process to get the CE approvals on our AI-assisted data review tools. And look, it's challenging. And when you're working globally as well, you've got different regulations in different places. And of course, the data protection rules, like GDPR and HIPAA, add extra boundaries as well. But the good thing is that governments and the regulators are becoming more sophisticated than we probably realise. Certainly, there is an appetite, even in some of the slower countries like Germany, for example. They're really risk adverse, but their governments now are really pushing towards these digital health tools and really want to see things move much, much faster. And change is happening in the world right now, and it's happening really fast. We thought it would take 10 years to get to this more sort of at-home healthcare, and of course with COVID, it seems to have just happened overnight. And governments seem to be supportive of this. So there's never been a better time. And of course, when you're looking at cloud computing infrastructure, that's of course extremely important in this space. The regulations in terms of what services that we can use as a healthcare provider are changing for the better. When we started Seer, we could not have used those services and systems that we use today. And all of a sudden it just becomes possible, just only in the last couple of years. And of course, this is backed up with mobile devices and 4 and now 5G networks. And then all of a sudden, the world is changing, all for the better. So it's never been a better time. It's fantastic, and I think we're going to see a lot of change for the positive.
Excellent, thank you, Dean. And then, of course, there's regulation. Another blocker potentially is boards. And Barb, I'm going to throw back to you with your management consulting background and what do you think we need to do to engage corporations and particularly their boards so that they can have the confidence to actually procure startups and AI technologies more broadly?
Yeah, really interesting question. So I mean, we feel there's a huge education role that we play, obviously of the HR community, but also of the C-suite about what does it take to trust AI? What are the questions to ask when you're looking at different tools that claim to be built off AI? And I think CEOs and boards need to educate themselves, quite frankly. Are they inviting people in to look at their business and go, here across the different operations that we have, whether it be manufacturing people, what does AI potentially offer us, just even to create the awareness about the opportunity? Because there's a huge FOMO, that should come from AI. Because I know in our space, if you start now, and what we do is we use machine learning to retrain our models so that we get more and more accurate in identifying the right fit for a given role, suddenly you run the potential of your having churn that might be 20% less than your peer. You're seeing sales increase at a significant, faster rate, and you really jump away from the pack. So I think if there's any CEO who cares about how do we remain competitive, you've got to recognize the role that AI plays, because It enables you to learn much faster and process much faster, and therefore, break away from the pack. So if they're not inviting those experts and having those conversations and educating themselves, I think, it could be like Kodak versus, the rest of the world. You suddenly lose sight of what's really going on in your industry.
Dean, yes.
I thought I might just add something there, because a really important point that Barb made just then, and it's really important in healthcare as well. And I think this is something that's poorly understood in the AI space, and that is that the systems that are in play today are really, the ones that are really good are recommender systems. So they're not necessarily replacing the human. What they're doing is they're enhancing the human. So they're assisting the decision-making process to make it faster and easier and more accurate. And I think that's a critical piece here, and is often misunderstood. And that plays into the regulatory space as well, because most systems that are making impact today really don't take the human out of the loop. And that's really important.
And Barbara, sorry, I think you wanted to make a comment there as well.
Well, I think it's like anything else. It does actually require a scrutiny system. So it does need a risk and ethics framework that means that you have oversight of what's going to be a plethora of solutions. And if you're looking at deep learning models, you've got black box systems. And these efforts are happening. There needs to be an ethical framework and a risk framework that says that the chances of this being detrimental if it goes wrong is this, therefore it requires more scrutiny, and even a certification framework. Now, I would sign up immediately to have that scrutiny, because trust is at the kernel of what we do, trust and privacy. So I think those things are being developed, and that's where ordinary people need to be able to intersect, so that they can trust that at least there's a fallback, or at least somebody's watching these systems, so that we can rely on them. Now, given the opportunities of AI, if you're a board member, and given that they have governance responsibilities, it's contributions to these sorts of ethical frameworks that I think ultimately will carry us through. This sort of discussion has been going on for thousands of years. And in fact, technology can enable discussions about it.
Yes, there's definitely something in that, Barbara, particularly for Pax Republic. So, Barb, you wanted to add a comment as well.
Yeah, so look, I'm sure we've all seen Social Dilemma. I know I've watched it multiple times, and, we all sit there in fear and imagine what the world's going to become given what that story tells us. And so for us in our team, we think about that a lot. And I agree with you, Barbara, it's all about trust at the centre. And I think government has a really critical role to play, as we do, to co-create and articulate what are the principles that we need to examine this technology against, so that we don't have another social media disaster when it comes to the inadvertent consequences of AI. And we also believe that trust is at the centre, and that fairness, really broadly defined, is important, which is a bunch of different things. It's explainability, it's transparency, it's accountability. So that's something that we're coming out with ourselves as a team, having discussed it, because otherwise we can't, hand on heart, feel like we're not going to be, in a movie like Social Dilemma Part 2 in 5 or 10 years' time. So I think we have to, and government has to kind of, facilitate these discussions. And I think as an industry, if we can come up with a set of principles and a bit of a charter that we then measure ourselves against, that would help industry a lot.
Absolutely. And so, Andrew, is government doing enough?
Well, I mean, I suppose speaking for ourselves from the BioBI front, we've been, I suppose, quite generously supported from LaunchVic. So from that front, we're quite pleased. But in general, I think, the whole industry of AI, Australia's probably lagging a little bit behind in terms of overall share of AI funds deployed. So I think the statistic that I have in my head was that Australia's GDP footprint worldwide is 1.8%. But in terms of Australia's share of worldwide AI funding, it's 0.29%. So we're about 1/6 of where it should be. So look, that's not to say that AI funding has to come from government. I think it's very much an ecosystem effort. It's not only the investors, I think the institutions, it's the corporations as well, academia, all getting together. So it's very much a an ecosystem effort. As much as people put money into AI as well, you also need people that are willing to buy the solutions, that are educated on the topic. So, you know, it's not, I don't think there's a silver bullet over here. And I personally have the belief that people just, you know, constantly asking government for all the solutions. I personally don't think that's correct. I think it's everyone sort of getting together and doing their bit.
Absolutely. And, you know, going back to the ethical question, Dean, I mean, you've got AI ethics, healthcare ethics, you know, you've got the double whammy in your sector, probably more than perhaps any other sector. That might be too bold a statement. But do you think the ethics is keeping pace with the technology development? Is there more that we need to do? Because ultimately, if the ethics and the development align, then the rollout and the procurement will be faster. So are we keeping pace?
Yeah, look, I think so. I think so. You know, it's extremely challenging though, because I think like Barbara said, you know, we're dealing often with black box systems, and it becomes extremely hard for, especially the medical world, for people to use these because they're making life and death decisions and not understanding the decision-making process that happens underneath it all is really, really challenging. And so that's why I was saying before that it's really important to keep the human in the loop, especially in healthcare for now. So what the systems can do though is help the medical professionals find the critical pieces of information that they need faster and more accurately. And with that, we get real benefits into the system. And then it unlocks healthcare. Like at Seer, we now serve more people for epilepsy diagnostics than all of the hospitals in Australia combined, and then doubled, right? And so there's an enormous efficiency gain through the systems that we've created, and they're also more accurate. And so when you think about ethics, it's a dual-sided discussion, I would say. Certainly there's some of the systems are fraught, but in terms of the benefits that you can get from the community, I think that we should be doing more. But of course, the challenges is like, who are the first adopters? And that's one of the things that's really important for us at Seer, for us to not just create the technology, but also to be able to provide a service. And so with our service, we provide a buffer for the medical professionals. And so that makes it a little bit easier for them to use it. And then once we start to overcome and prove out the technology, I guess, it could be more mainstream.
So I want to change tack a bit now, and it does lead on a little bit from what you just said there, Dean. We've got a number of startups on the line, and I know, you know, given LaunchVic's audience, there are a number of people in the audience that would perhaps have their own company and be thinking, do I move my company into AI? Because I think that's a question that a lot of startups can ask. What would be your advice to startups that are on the cusp of starting a company, not quite sure what the next step is, questioning whether they're going down the AI route? What are the things that they should be thinking about at that very early stage that might perhaps differ from a software app startup that isn't using AI? I'm going to throw that question to Barbara to begin with.
Find somebody with some deep pockets. This is the thing that is, it's not unique to AI, but I think isn't appreciated because of the emergence. AI is still emerging with the applications of AI, is that it's a bit more like biotech or medtech. It's experiments and you're iterating, and you need masses of data with learning models. You know, we all learn, it's something that builds, and the value only really starts to come once you've got lots of data and got well-honed models. So that's not like putting out an app and getting people to sign up for it. It's the long haul, and that's what I think is one of the biggest problems, and very probably why AI doesn't tend to get off in Australia, and why you do have to leave the country to actually get that support. It's worth investing in, and this growth, you know, the 1 trillion, I think Dean talked 3 trillion. We've got to find a way to support what is the future of the world. Because it's really worth investing in AI, and particularly as it tends to be in the large enterprise space. We're starting in the large enterprise market. They're conservative. We've talked about that. They're conservative buyers. They have a notoriously long sales cycle. That you can't. It's hard because you need that customer data and that customer insight. It's really hard to get, and it will take a long time. But conversely, the opportunity that happens, I mean, even in our technology, we built a room but actually the business is going to be on the data analysis that we needed to make our technology work. The opportunities in AI, the market opportunities are huge. So that's one of the things.
And Barbara, I see you've got your hand up there, and I'm going to let you speak, but I also want to throw a related question from Chris, who has a small company and wants to be an AI startup, but doesn't know how to fund the research as he doesn't have the funds available. How do you convince someone to give you the money when you have no experience in this area? So Barb, can I throw that to you, but also feel free to add on to what Barbara just said?
Well, I think it really answers both questions, or it's related, which is, you know, you can't build a product and hope to find a customer. You've got to figure out what the problem is and who's got that problem, and then build the product to solve that problem. So for us, in our early days, we had the same challenge, Barbara, which is, you know, our hypothesis was that data, text data and natural language can reveal a lot about a person, and you can use that and productize that in recruitment. But we had to find someone who had a big problem to solve in that vein of a lot of applicants care about the experience, and we found Qantas. So you have to find a couple of customers for whom the pain is so huge that they are prepared to partner with you over the journey. And interestingly with them, they had already used an AI solution, which didn't work for them because the candidate experience being video was not what they wanted. They had a very high dropout, and for them, candidate experience was really important. So, you know, we just picked some businesses that had the problem and then worked with them. And in fact, a lot of our product development really obviously comes from solving Qantas's and other big customers like Bunnings, Iceland, etc. problems. So you have to start with who cares, and do that, you know, are there enough people that care about this? And is it a big enough pain point? Because you're also selling change in AI. Like, one thing we've realized is, you know, this isn't like Expensify. You're not kind of downloading it and off you go. This is a fundamental rewrite of how you do something that's core to your business. So, you know, if the problem is not big enough and if the business doesn't see that as a problem, then you're wasting your time. And I would say that's even now that we've got product market fit, we have to find the buyer persona who's a true leader. You need a leadership, you know, because you're putting your brand out there as a head of HR or as a CFO to bring in AI. So you've got to pick the right buyer persona, but most of all, find the big problem first and work with those customers.
Thank you. So I'm going to give a Dorothy Dixer question to Andrew. So, you know, I would say, and I'll do the plug, that if you are a company that's looking for help and looking to grow into AI and go on that journey, I would definitely be reaching out to Andrew and the team at Boab AI. It's not just an accelerator, but Boab is doing events and all sorts of things around the AI ecosystem to grow our ecosystem. So Andrew, can I ask you to, there's a question on the channel. What are the big, from Bryce, what are the biggest hurdles in getting AI solutions implemented? And is there anything ordinary people can do to help reduce these hurdles? And can I please ask you to tell us what Boab AI actually does for startups and people with these sorts of questions?
Sure, thanks a lot. And so the offer that we have is the equity investment component is $300,000. So we are committed to investing in at least 32 companies over the next 4 years with $300,000 minimum each. But in terms of the services that we provide, it's you know, it's a scale-up program. So essentially, we're addressing the strengths and the weaknesses of each company that come in. So whether a company coming in has difficulty with raising the remainder of their round, and the vast majority of companies that we've spoken with aren't just raising $300,000, they're raising $1 million, $2 million, or even $3 million. So we might sort of help them in that sort of respect. Or another popular area that people are asking for assistance in is in enterprise sales. So that's where we have people that have these enterprise relationships that we can sort of help to cross-introduce and facilitate corporate customers. But in terms of, I suppose, building an AI solution, I do very much appreciate Barb's perspective over there. If you do have a customer there, someone that's willing to sort of work with you from the beginning, it's almost as if you can have product market fit from the very beginning. But the other component, I would also reiterate Barbara's perspective earlier, that, you know, AI, I think, requires a very large data set. So if you do have some sort of specialized access to data to be able to, you know, create a model that does have a competitive advantage, I think that's really helpful. And Once again, I don't think there's any particular silver bullet. So it's, having data, access to capital, customers, and of course, the VCs always love talking about the team. So if you can have access to the top talent, that's of course very advantageous. So I'm generally quite agnostic about these things, but there's a whole host of variables I think that can feed in to try to boost your chances of success in getting a successful AI company off the ground.
Dean, over to you. And I was actually going to also ask you about your experience in accessing capital. So I'll throw to you, Dean.
Yep, thanks very much. So first of all, some advice to people starting out. One of the things that I've certainly found now is that you can think of some of the AI algorithms as almost things you can buy off the shelf. So AWS and Google Cloud and Azure, all these platforms are wonderful. There's these products that you can just rent, I guess, and then they will create these algorithms for you. The hard part, like Andrew said, is access to data. And it's not just access to data, but it's access to curated data. And that's the hard part, really. It's curating your data in a way that's specialized, that can solve problems going forward. So look, there is, technical challenges can be overcome with things like AWS. It's really not that hard, but access to data and curating that data is really, really difficult, and building that infrastructure to do so. For us at Seer, we started off with a service. So we actually bought devices that, we actually just purchased devices off the shelf, and we were able to get going with a clinical service very quickly. And that the service itself provided us with that access to that data, and providing reports back to physicians, was an automatic curation of that data as we were going. And so with that, we were able to build the company as we were, billing for services. So it was a really fantastic way for us to be able to bootstrap the business and get it going. And so now we've got the opportunities really to go global with it. We're running pilots at Mayo Hospital in the US and King's in London, and we're actually looking to raise capital now. So it's certainly an exciting time in the growth industry. So if anyone's interested, please get in touch. But yeah.
And do you think our VC community in Australia is very open to AI, and that there are enough local investors, or is that something that and I should also add angel investors as well. Do we have enough investors in this area, or is that something that we should be focusing on?
Look, it's really tough because what you'll find is probably 95% of people that you talk to just don't get it here in Australia, and that's a shame. And the 5% that do get it are really enthusiastic. So look, there's a lot more that we can do here. There is, a bunch of angel investors who have, experience, they're entrepreneurs as well. And they're the people that really get it. And you can tell your story to these people and they will understand, but also help you along. We see other companies in the US like doing similar things to Seer. They can raise, $50, $100, $500 million to build a similar system. And that's what we've got to compete with. We've got to compete with companies that have $500 million in the bank. And, I think we need to reset our sights in terms of our levels of ambitions here in Australia, because as we've heard today, we've got the talent and we've got the drive. We just need the backing.
Absolutely. And Barb, I can see you nodding. Do you want to add anything to that your experience in raising capital?
I was just thinking I'm going to suggest some names to Dean after this, but I think in the context of offshore, we compete with businesses that are at similar stages to us in terms of product innovation that are getting 10 times the capital and 10 times the valuations. And it kind of didn't really hit me until recently. So, that is really tough. But I don't know how you fix that. My view would be for our next round, Series B, we're definitely wanting to go to the US, because I think they just see the value in technology like this, that, Australian companies may not have the resources to invest that kind of quantum. And it's a much more competitive market in the US. I get probably an email a week from VCs overseas wanting to know our tech and have a conversation. I don't think I've ever received one from anyone in Australia.
Goodness, that's insightful. Wow. And Barb, how about yourself? Is there anything you would like to add to that discussion?
I think one of the problems is that Australia is like Dean and Barb have been saying, it is conservative. It's not really that, they don't take many risks. And one of the problems that you have is that they won't invest in something that they don't really understand. My experience is that some are now, and even amongst angel investors, will bring in resources to assess. There's more, with COVID-19, there's more interest in technology stocks. But for a lot of them, they don't need to invest in things that they don't really understand. You know, I hear it all the time. Do you know how many decks I see every year? No, or there's no real incentive in a very asymmetric market for anyone to look particularly closely. I mean, I've had VC says, well, it sounds like you're doing consulting still. So there's a lack of sophistication in some ways about something like AI, but it's certainly improving, which is a good thing. But I think if there is some support that that helps people to navigate and understand, I mean, this is what a good ecosystem can do, is actually demystify a lot of the AI, and help people to see that this is the future. This is going to enhance the world, enhance society, and we should be in it, because I think nearly half of the investment in AI is coming from the rest of the world. They're investing in billions of dollars in this. So I'd like Australian investors to be part of it. So there's a job to be done to help them so that they don't feel so nervous about investing in AI.
Absolutely. So I'm going to change tack again. Andrew, I'm going to throw a question to you. What's the hottest AI thing you've seen other than Pax Republic, Predictive, Hire and Seer? What's happening in the world of AI? What's the super exciting startups and applications of AI that you're seeing?
I mean, from the international perspective, of course, I'm sure everyone's heard of GPT-3 and that algorithm that's sort of been bought out from that. So it's just, mind-boggling that it can just, write blogs for you that just go viral. And so I'm pretty amazed by that. And I think that's only just helped to prove the level of AI that's actually possible today. And I believe the statistic was that they put $12 million into just producing that one model. But yeah, it's just been amazing to sort of see that sort of thing is possible. But on the local front, I have been very impressed, particularly by a lot of the robotics. So once again, from the agtech perspective, or even from construction technology, or even in health, some of the automatic, for example, fruit picking robots. I love seeing those things in action. And yeah, I just believe that robotics is at that turning point where the computer vision algorithms are finally sufficient to be able to power the manual tasks that they actually do. So yeah, those are probably the exciting areas that I see at the moment.
And Barb, Dean, or Barbara, do you have any companies or startups or applications of AI that you're particularly excited by? Barbara, you've come off mute.
Oh, well, as Andrew said, the GPT-3 is very exciting. It's very challenging. But language is our territory, so it really shows that you can understand an enormous amount through the words that we speak. To me, because we're very human AI centered, being able to use what is essential to the human race, language, is a really exciting thing. I think it throws up real challenges, in the same as fruit pickers and robotics. The same thing for this. I'm an ex-journalist. GPT-3 will be turning who, what, why, when, and how totally on its head. They've been writing news stories for a while now, but it does underline that they can write and they can generate, but they can't create. I think a similar example was in music. They used AI I forgot who'd used AI to write the final movement of the famously unfinished symphony by Schubert. And of course, they used all of his music to actually write a very competent final movement, but it wasn't exactly inspiring or creative or beautiful or actually particularly creative. So it just shows that the really good thing will make us as human beings better rather than actually substitute. But there are lots of challenges and reshaping of society that comes through it too.
So I'm going to throw one final question to all of you, and it's the crystal ball question that we always end our LaunchVic seminars on, which is, where is Australia going to be in 10 years' time, and what do we have to do to get there? So Dean, I'll throw to you first.
Oh, wow. Yeah, so I guess, where's Australia going to be in 10 years' time? I'll just answer in particular around healthcare. Look, you know, Australia is really lucky to have Medicare. It's like probably the Medicare system is probably the only system that I've seen in the world where Seer could have launched. So that is was a fantastic opportunity to have the Medicare system here in Australia for us. And look, in what it's 10 years time, in hopefully we'll see more and more services pop up like Seer that can solve accessibility challenges. You know, we rely on the bricks and mortar hospitals for so many services here in Australia, and of course we live in a really big country with people in rural and remote areas all around the place. And I think AI and healthcare and the ability to be able to provide personalised insights is going to lift the standard of life for, most importantly, for people in rural and remote areas, because what it can do is really encode the expertise of the world's best medical professionals and give access to that expertise through the algorithms to those people. So yeah, we hope that that's the way it goes, and we'll see, I guess.
Well, I have no doubt that Seer will play a big role in that, certainly in the context of epilepsy. Barb, how about you? Where do you think we're going to be in 10 years' time, and what do we need to do to get there?
Yeah, so look, I think that Australia will be in a really commanding position. Reality is we don't work in a bubble, we work within a society, within a culture. And I think if you look at what's going on around the world, there's a lot that's really healthy about our culture, certainly relatively speaking. And in a world of remote work, which I think will be continuous, our ability to attract talent who want to be part of an Australian organisation because of that culture, because of really almost our social stability, I think we will continue to attract the best of talent, but not just in our region, on a global stage. And I don't think we're in any way disadvantaged by our size or small data sets, to be honest. Like, look at Israel. Israel is a tiny, tiny country. You can go from one side to the other in 9 hours in a car. And yet it is globally competitive on a number of different fronts, including in AI. So I think we've got to kind of, recognise the advantage we've got almost in a social culture dimension to attracting talent and building great businesses and fantastic organisations. And, how do we leverage that, right? We're never going to have 1 billion people like China, but we've got something else that's really unique. So build on that, and I think that'll put us in a really strong position in, 10, 20 years' time.
Excellent answer. And Barbara, to you.
Well, COVID-19 has shown us we're a pretty cooperative nation and a pretty stable nation. And the shifts, the mindset shifts that have come with going remotely and all of those changes, and the fact that we've had 10 years worth of digital transformation happen in about 10 months, in Australia means that it doesn't actually matter that we're a little nation at the bottom of the world. It means that we can be globally competitive now. We don't have to get on the plane and go to San Francisco to raise money. We can actually do it here. They're coming to us. So that stability, I think, is a huge advantage, not just in the region, but globally. We can run our businesses from here. So if we are clever about actually backing ourselves and seeing where the trends are going, particularly in AI, we've shown we can knock. We've got the advantage of an island nation. We can run stuff from here, and we can really make the most of grab opportunities as they arise and take them globally, because the world is there digitally for us now. It's sort of like that cultural cringe can finally we let go.
Fantastic. And Andrew, over to you.
Yeah, if I can speak on a macro scale, and obviously AI extends to financial services, health, HR, agriculture. The way I see it, in 10 years' time, there'll be almost like two sets of types of countries. There'll be the countries that have invested and are adopters of AI, are producing AI, and there'll be those that are perhaps a little bit less competitive, that haven't adapted and haven't had that sort of technological curve. Because look, at the end of the day, AI is a competitive advantage, and if you're able to do a certain service within an industry much more efficiently at a lower cost, that makes you a lot more competitive. So, in order to get there, I think it's very much an ecosystem play. It's not just about, as I said earlier, one industry or one government or, you know, one certain player within the ecosystem doing everything. It's about, you know, everyone doing their bit. And perhaps in particular, it's also just even as an everyday consumer, being more amenable to, you know, looking into AI solutions or being more innovative with your thinking.
Fantastic. And it goes without saying that BOAB AI will be the leading AI accelerator in a decade.
Absolutely.
Wonderful. Well, can I thank you to Barb, Dean, Barbara and Andrew. We cannot thank you enough for your insights. It's been a very broad-ranging discussion, but an incredibly insightful discussion. I think for me, you know, the things that stuck out was the work that we have to do, doing it together, the amount of education, but we do have the talent, we do have the drive, and it's ours for the losing. And certainly at LaunchVic, we're very passionate about growing this sector. If you're a startup that's looking to get involved in the AI industry, please reach out to us, reach out to Andrew, and more broadly the startup community, because there are lots of people that are gunning for you, and we definitely want to make sure that we drive the AI technology sector as much as we can. As always, my thanks to the LaunchVic team, and particularly Katie and Ish for pulling this together. They always do a fantastic job behind the scenes. And finally, thank you for everyone for attending. We hope you enjoyed it. And thank you again to our panelists. We hope you enjoy the rest of your afternoon.
All right, thanks, Matt.